everybody, and welcome. This is a version of THAT.live. We've made all the things work, and it's a beautiful Monday, so welcome. Look forward to having this conversation. With me today, I have Colin Lord, or I should say none other than Colin Lord, which has a lot of soda pop behind him. Colin, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. Before we get into things, and we're going to kind of meander around the conversation, why don't you give everybody a little, who is Colin Lord?
Well, the fact that you called it soda pop indicates you are not from Atlanta, which is where I grew up.
No.
We call all soda pop, whatever, Coke. Even if it's not Coke, if you're drinking a Sprite, we define it in Atlanta as Coke. I grew up there, and I thought I was always going to live there. I took a job somewhere else, met my wife, and we ended up in Nashville. But Atlanta's always been my home, and I've collected random little things like Coke bottles and Atlanta Braves bobbleheads. And until the pandemic, I didn't really know what to do with them. And now I'm on all these video calls all day. So I needed something interesting. Some people have green screens. I have Coke bottles.
I like
it's
it.
a nice little weird quirk to stand out when you've got a room of 50 people on the screen. Everybody's like, what is that behind him? And I'm always happy to explain because it gives me validation for having these boxes all the years that we moved.
That's funny. I mean, we grew up saying pop.
Yeah, that's rough. That's Midwest.
Right. So over the years, I've converted to soda, but yeah, no. And over the years, I've tried to not drink as much.
Yeah, same thing for me.
Pop.
I've tried to cut down the Coke consumption, and this kind of is a troll at myself because it's like, oh, it looks pretty tasty behind me.
Yeah, no, you got a nice juicy camera. It's much appreciated. So how many bottles you got going back there?
I honestly don't even know the exact number. It's enough to fill up an entire shelf. So we're probably talking at least 3 dozen.
So they look tiny. Are they tiny bottles or are they full size, like 12 ounce, the old school 12-ounce bottles?
Yeah, I mean, they're the like the traditional 8-ounce.
Okay.
Like
there
so,
you go.
And it's actual Coke.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Objects appear accurately sized in the window.
Yeah.
So, how's life been since we've been on the COVID? So I'm north, you're south. How's COVID life down in Nashville?
Well, it's kind of we got the COVID start about a week and a half before everyone else did, because before that all took off, Nashville was hit by a tornado and it went right through downtown.
Oh, that's
so I
right.
actually haven't been back to the office since we had that tornado hit. And we worked from home a few days. It went right through, like I was watching the news and the tower cam of the city, and I see a tornado, and there's my office that I go to every day. So that was a bit of a surreal event. And the next week was when everyone started the work from home thing. And outside of running to the office one time to get my monitor, I have not been back since. And I try not to think too far ahead with this stuff because in March, nobody knew what April was going to look like. And I was just trying to conserve mental energy. So it actually took me until about a month ago to get a work from home desk. I was sitting at my wife's desk with all of her stuff just basically pushed to the wall. And then I just plopped the monitor down, set my laptop next to it. And I was like, I'm sure I'll be back to work in a couple of weeks. And then a month went by and another month went by, and hopped on Amazon and bought a nice $99 desk. And that's when the Coke bottle shelf became a thing. Because honestly, I don't know when I'll be able to go back, because I work in downtown Nashville in a 20-story building. So it's everything that isn't social distancing. So we'll probably be one of the last people to be allowed back in.
Now, you work for a company called Smiles by Design, right?
Smile Direct Club.
Oh, okay. My bad. And I'm thinking of the design piece. That's where the design came in. So, and you're on a small team. I think you said four front-end developers.
Yeah, 4 front-end guys, yeah.
So how has the team adjusted to that? I mean, have you guys had to drastically change the day-to-day, kind of the workflow?
It hasn't been all that terrible because all of us had remote experience in the past. So, I mean, at least for me, it doesn't feel like we've lost too much productivity. It was just kind of this is what we're going to be doing now.
Sure.
for like the bigger company, it's obviously work from home had, I think, dramatic impacts. Like most of Smile Direct's employees are like they work in the retail stores or they're making the aligners. So it's a lot harder to transition as opposed to more front end developers who just now sit at home and write code instead of sitting next to each other in an open office in downtown.
Sure. Has there been any hindsight that, you could look back and go, I wish we would have done this differently or do this going forward?
Yeah, honestly, I don't really have any lessons learned from me yet, other than we're on Microsoft Teams and we try to do like a daily stand up on there. Because if I get pulled in one direction, I'm not sitting next to my other 3 team members, so that way, we all know what we're working on. If it was the old days when we're in the office and I get pulled into a 4-hour meeting, they're going to know I'm not at my desk. And now we don't have that. But like for us, it's probably gone pretty smoothly other than just trying to figure out how to communicate with everybody else.
Yeah.
Cause like we don't work in a silo. Like all of our work is dependent on like direction of the company, designers or whatever. Sure. And trying to deal with, not deal with the wrong term, but communicate and figure out, what are their needs and what do they need from us. That's probably been the biggest challenge for the 4 of us. Now
you're training for an Ironman, or have been. So
right.
I'm
Coke bottles included.
Right. I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. Carb load before you go. How, with working at home, I think I've been working at home forever, for a decade plus. With everybody working from home, I know there's this propensity to work more, just because it's here, it's near, it's easy to do. Some are fearful for kind of the state of what next month would look like. Have you had to kind of readjust because I'm sure your training schedule is pretty intense on a day by day, week by week basis. Yeah. How does all that kind of played into this?
I mean, well, it was weird to begin with because the rec center and the pool that I would swim at.
Oh yeah, I didn't think about that.
So I didn't have access to a pool until 2 weeks ago. I have a bike, obviously, and it's connected to a trainer that I got on Black Friday. It was a Black Friday deal, and I'm really glad I bought that because I can ride at home now without going out. And then running, I can just, you can run wherever. So there was a bit of an adjustment there, except for the fact that I had to train to swim without being in a pool, which was interesting.
I mean, you guys got a river down there. Can't you just swim in the river?
Yeah, I mean, there's a triathlon in July that hopefully will still happen, and I'll get to swim down that river.
But did it change? Now that people are working from home? I mean, did it change? You have that like not in the office, if you will, so that shift of I'm physically leaving to being out, and people know where they can find me or not. You change your training schedules, or do you guys, from a team perspective, like, look, this is when we're available and this is when we're not available?
Yeah, I mean, at least for me, that's something I could definitely improve upon, because generally with Ironman training, I try to do it before work or after work, and it's at least 90 minutes probably on a standard day. So I'm either in the before time, yeah. I'm getting into work at 9, or I'm getting into work at 7 and leaving early to go home and train or bike or whatnot. And now there isn't really a defined, well, when are we supposed to be here? When are we not? And I've got, my email and Microsoft Teams and everything on my phone. So I've been guilty of answering messages at 7 a.m. all the way to 7 p.m. And it's, I think I should probably have defined some sort of, these are my working hours, but it's also kind of hard because it doesn't feel any different. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's kind of struggled with that work from home thing where, when am I on the clock? When am I not? Because before I was always happy to fire off a text or whatever if somebody needed something, but now that's all one and the same. And I'm trying to get better at it, but it's a slippery slope from, hey, let me just answer one question to, okay, let me open my laptop. And then 45 minutes later, I'm debugging something and I realize my dinner's gotten cold.
Yep. And that's exactly why I asked. I mean, everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but most people are in the same position. And
if you aren't struggling with that, I would love to chat with you and figure out what you're doing, because I don't have solutions there. And I would just love to know what you did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess fair to say, like, we're all struggling with it in some regards.
Yeah.
And everybody, obviously, a little bit different depending upon their work setup. I know some places just weren't even ready to kind of take things on, and then got forced into it, which good thing, right? We can really work wherever.
Right. I mean, at least for our team, if, none of us really work from home full time, but if like you needed a day, like if you had a doctor's appointment or whatever, I'll go to the appointment and I'll work the rest of the day at home type thing. So we sort of had tested the waters of it. But if you've never worked from home before and all of a sudden you're sitting in your bonus room or your guest bedroom, I can imagine it being quite the exhausting conversion. And I didn't feel that because I've had work from home stuff in the past, and it was just kind of shifting the mental mindset to this is a work from home gig now.
But at the same token, right, there was a hump or a milestone that you took to go say, look, I need a proper desk and a space. So
yeah, I mean, that was really, at some point, I just sort of kind of began to put the pieces together. Like Nashville, I think like most cities, they released one of those multi-phase reopening plans. And it was like each phase has to last at least 2 or 3 weeks. And then there's benchmarks to get to the next phase. And assuming I interpreted it correctly, we wouldn't be allowed to go back to our office until after phase 4. And we're in phase 2 right now. So it's like, okay, even if this goes at the fastest rate they think, it's going to be at least 2 months before we could even legally be allowed to all go back down, according to what the city was saying. And that's when I was like, okay, I probably need a desk. And my wife was working at home too, so she wanted her desk back. So it was worthwhile to get a desk for both of us.
Yeah. We're in the same. In Illinois, there's a 5-phased approach to all this goo, and we just moved into stage 3, and it's all weird. And
it's so different city to city. Like I don't live in the county that Nashville is in. I'm one county south, and that county is doing things differently than Nashville is, even though I can get in my car and get to the Nashville city limits in 15 minutes.
Yeah. So
it's like you need to really follow Twitter or the news or whatever closely just to know what applies to what when you're on one of those borders between the metropolitan area and all of the suburbs and everything else outside of it. And that's true for every major city in Tennessee. They're all doing their own thing, and then the state is doing the rest of the state, everybody else that's not included. So it's confusing to say the least.
Yeah, and we live on the border of Illinois and Wisconsin, so we have one thing over in Wisconsin and another thing in Illinois, and the two do not match, and it's creating interesting border. I don't want to say border wars, but border issues, and I don't know, hard times. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, you guys have this design system for Smiles Direct, and I guess for those who may not, I'll put it in the chat, but what kind of caught me by, I don't want to say surprise, was that one, you have a published design system. I think of like Airbnb and some of the Bay Valley, I just totally made that up. The Valley companies that, have really taken a stance and published their kind of inner workings. What led y'all to like taking that step?
There wasn't really a conscious, we want to do this type of thing. It was more of a, like we had a weekly design system meeting where we would talk about it, and we realized, I think the main reason was we're a team of 4, and this is definitely something you want more input on than 4 people. And rather than trying to figure out, well, who should get the link and all that stuff, it was easier just to go that route. And that way, if I want to send it to a colleague from a former job and get their thoughts, it's simple to go that route.
Yeah, it's an impressive step. Did you have to go through, or did y'all as a team have to go through a lot of, I don't want to say corporate hoo-ha, but kind of convincing of everybody to say, this is something we want to do?
Not really, but it's something that it's still pretty early on in the, like we're still I'm actively working on it. Like that design system isn't really what the current site is. It's something that is the main focus of our team now. So it might change down the road. It's a rough early version type thing, and those would be decisions that would go beyond my chair. But that's where we are right now.
Yeah, but you still took the step. Like I have to imagine that's kind of the harder piece of all of it.
Yeah, it wasn't something that I personally had a lot of involvement in. I wasn't the lead of the design system guy. But yeah, I mean, it certainly made it easier to involve other people and get feedback, which I'm appreciative of. Like it's out on NPM even, so it's it's pretty cool.
What have been some, like, I don't want to ask this. So now that it's there, what's it enabled that you haven't had before? Like, is it put you all in a different like mindset because it's this published thing, and do you find yourself kind of not skimping? If that makes any sense.
I think a little bit. It's one of those things that it's out there, but we haven't done a whole lot of like talking about it yet. If that makes sense, it's really kind of been more for other teams that we work with. A good example would be like for the front end team, we don't manage any of the emails that go out, but obviously the creatives want all those to line up together. So in a perfect world, they would pull from the exact same source code and everything that we would. And that was sort of the first sort of reaching out. Hey, what do you guys think about this? What are your needs? And getting their feedback. It's yeah. I mean, like I said, it's one of those things that if you have the link, it's out there. But I mean, I hoped at some point this year to go to a conference and talk about it for an hour, but then coronavirus happened and all that stuff kind of got sidetracked. But it's sort of in that we haven't talked about it much yet, but it's there phase, if that makes sense.
So do all of the teams then use the public, NPM, if you will, or are they using a different version?
Right now, the only team that's actively using it regularly is us.
Right. But are you using what you've published versus?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
like there's a review process, and like it's a PR type thing where we'll go and look at it, and usually like right now it's minor stuff, so we'll just give it a thumbs up and it rolls out. But yeah, I mean, we set that process up very early on, that like we wanted to version control it and make a release type schedule and process, because it's better to do it at the beginning than it is 2 years into it.
Yeah, I mean, you're not paying enough like respect for the fact that y'all took that step, because it's, I don't know, at least personally, I think you go put something in NPM, right? You've got a contract that you've put out there, and just the act of, forcing yourself to version it and deal with, older versions and all that, whether it's your own process or not. I mean, that's still a huge step.
Yeah. I think part of the reason that we went that step was we all inherited, a lot. We've all been down the technical debt road before, and we kind of had an opportunity to reset. And we all were like, well, we never want to get to this place again. What are ways to prevent that from happening? That's one way to sort of make sure that everything that you're putting out is what you want to live with, rather than just, the old way, which is push save and not worry about it for a while.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big deal. I think it's, even just the act of going through and saying like, this is our documentation of our design system. Even that assertion, that's a big step for people to take. Never mind, trying to consume it and do all that. So props, because I think it's a big deal.
Well, thanks. I mean, like I said, we're still pretty early on into it, so maybe that's why I'm kind of downplaying it a bit, because it feels like there's a lot of potential there that we haven't tapped. It's kind of like, to go back to a triathlon, you feel like you've trained for it, but you're 1 mile into the very beginning and a long way to go, and you don't want to start thinking about the medal and the giant meal you're going to get when you finish the race.
Yeah, we got a question in the chat. Mike this is something they've wanted to do with their company, and he's commenting on how they've struggled to make it useful for the engineers. What did your rollout, like you create this thing, what did your rollout kind of integration into? You say you inherited this thing. This is your kind of refactor, reformat moment to take on new things. How did the rollout look? and the buy-in?
Well, it wasn't we're replacing the existing work. I mean, the fact that we're doing essentially a refresh of a lot of things, like it was rolled out in tandem with all the existing stuff. So it wasn't like we forced it upon anybody. And like if you go back to the email work that a lot of people are working on, where we wanted them to start using our design system, we didn't really force it upon them. It was more of a, hey, we want to work with you guys. We think it'll make your life easier, and kind of approach it as a partnership rather than I'm dictating here's how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's true of any kind of project you're trying to roll out. But if you're trying to start something with another team, if you come to them in more of a problem solving, we're partners in this kind of mindset, you're not gonna really have a lot of headaches. At least we didn't. They were all pretty excited to start coming to our design system meetings and offer feedback. And I think that's the main reason why is we started this initiative to help problems beyond our team. And it wasn't ever, like I said, it wasn't ever forced on anybody. It was a brand new thing that could coexist with the existing site. So in theory, let's say we're building a new page. We want to use the new design system on the old site. They can coexist. It's not going to break the old code by bringing in the new code. And that was a very intentional design, because you're never going to be able to go from black to white, a brand new site 1.0 to 2.0. There's always going to be a transition, and it was important to be able to manage that. So I think that's kind of made a lot of the potential pitfalls that we've run into not too much of a concern.
So then taking the next step of this, do you in your mind, are you treating this like a pure open source project? Open source project in the sense that like your source is there, you got PRs that are out. I didn't even look. I actually am on the repository. Yeah, so you have your stuff is in your. Why am I confirming my account? I done hit the wrong buttons now. So your GitHub repo's not there anymore? Wait, what? Well, let me go back to my question while I'm trying to click around on your links. So are you treating it like a pure open source project, even to the outside world?
I think mentally we're trying to approach it that way, because you'll write code differently if your mindset is anybody can look at this. I don't think it's ever going to be like somebody else would just go grab it and it would be useful to them, because it's very specific to our needs. At least for me personally, whenever I've been looking for a new role or investigating a company where somebody reached out to me, these kind of things add a lot of value to a company that if I'm trying to weigh, do I want to work at a company or not? If I see something like that out there, it's bonus points in my book, and it makes me want to work more with that company. And generally, if I'm ever given the opportunity, like whenever I've spoken at conferences, I try to mention my company and where I've worked, and here's some cool things that I can offer. Like a lot of my blog posts that I write, they reference work that I've done over the years, and not to, give it all away type thing, but give my lessons learned, show my code, show, where my potential pitfalls were. And, there's obviously a line, and it varies company to company, but the more that, you can give back to the internet. I mean, how many times have I found something on the internet to help me solve a problem? So I try to make it a two-way street, Stack Overflow and then anything else that you find in Google. But that's been a big thing for me throughout my career, especially as I get more gray hairs in my beard from bugs over the years. How do I help other people not get those gray hairs? And, I think that the design system is, it's something that, it's not intended for anybody else to use, but it's not something that is locked down, that nobody should ever see the light of day unless you are on our team.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know. Yes and no. Like again, I think you keep downplaying it. Like, I feel like the mere fact that it's sharing, like, why there's a ton of good that comes from it. And if somebody, I mean, it's the same argument Airbnb could make and say, no, why would anybody else want to use it? We're Airbnb, but at the same token, we've all followed their coding convention. I shouldn't say we all. A large majority of folks follow their coding conventions and all that because why not? It's good. They put the time in,
I mean,
right? So
I've borrowed, if that's a term you want to use, borrowed liberally from Airbnb and their conventions over the years because I've seen things and thought that's a good idea,
right.
and move on.
Right. I mean, I think it's great. What well, it seems we just got rated by Tail Learn Code. Thanks for everybody who just joined. Welcome. We're talking with Colin Lord, who would you consider yourself a front-end engineer?
Yes, that's my title.
Yeah. Well, that's not what I asked, though. I asked what you would consider yourself.
Oh, what I would.
Okay.
For once, my title accurately represents what I do, and that's not always been the case.
Yeah, I've just started making up my own titles now. So.
Well, it changes every 2 years anyway, like what the meaning is.
Yeah. So you got this design system out. How often? Well, I was just looking at this because I've been crawling your page. You haven't published, but 5 months ago, at least what I'm looking at in your direct. Why so long?
We reached a point where we're essentially integrating our own work now, and rather than work on the design system side of things, now we're rebuilding the site using the design system. So it's not really that work has stalled or anything like that. It's just that we're building components based on the design system rather than building the design system.
Fair. Yeah, fair. And I'm looking at your GitHub. I mean, you guys have a ton of stuff published. That's an impressive amount of source. So why? That's 29. You have 29 public repositories. I have to imagine there's 292 private.
Yeah, there's a bunch, I'm sure.
So, in that, it feels like the company, or at least the culture, is already kind of forward sharing. Is that a pretty accurate statement?
I think it's accurate. We've definitely been encouraged not to, shy away from talking to the community. It's one of the things that I asked when I interviewed for this role about 2 years ago. I said, look, I've spoken at a bunch of conferences over the years. I've enjoyed that. I'd like to continue doing that. What's the company stance on this? And they said, there is no official stance, but if that's something that you enjoy, by all means, be a good part of the community. And it's something I really appreciate.
So is there so for others who may be wanting to try to push their company to do that or get into it, do you have advice for them? Because it seems, if you stand back, like it doesn't feel like Smiles Direct would be a part of their, culture, and yet it is.
Yeah. I've worked at companies where that was not dictated not to do, but it was kind of seen as pointless maybe, or it didn't bring value directly to the company in terms of like, well, how does this get us a new client? Does this earn us money? If it doesn't, then, we don't see a lot of value in it. Mm-hmm. And I would say if you're getting resistance, probe deeper and have another conversation and try to find out why. Some of it might be, your company, your client, there's some sort of legal reason that they don't want, you to put code out there, and that's respectable. But if it's more of just, they don't see the gains from it, I would say that's a situation where you push a little harder and say, well, here are the gains. Let me help educate you. Like when I first wanted to try to speak at a conference, I had a couple of colleagues who were super helpful and sort of gave me their feedback and coached me. But most of the company that I was working for kind of was like, if you want to do it on your free time, go for it. But, it's up to you. We don't really see a lot of value in it. And that was kind of a bummer to hear, but if it's something that you think is important, don't let that deter you. If there's valid reasons, obviously, listen for those. But at least for me, whenever I've talked to people about, putting stuff out there on a blog or building your own site or putting something out on GitHub, usually one of the things that slows it down is people just don't see the value in spending that extra time to do it. And that to me it's a miss, because if you aren't spending that time, it makes me a better developer to build something and then write a blog post about how I built it, or put it on a code pen, or in a more extreme sense, make an hour-long conference talk and send it off to try to get somebody to want you to talk about it. The things that I've talked about at conferences or written code pens or blog posts about, I'm a better developer for it, which brings direct value to the company that I'm working for.
Yep.
So it's not one of those obvious things. I think a lot of people would look at it, like I said a few minutes ago, does this bring us a new client or does this bring us extra revenue? Well, probably not. But, if you dig a little deeper, it may actually provide benefits that are tangible. They're just not right at the surface where they're obvious.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the things we recently, I shouldn't say recently, about 8 months ago, decided to redo all of that conference platform. And
I've seen it. It looks good.
Put it all in open source. And, it's something as simple as, an API that does, as repositories, having a good README to get things documented, and a build process and a commit process, and how do you not leak secrets and all of that. That shit's hard. And it forces you down this path of, I guess if you want to use an analogy, right, forces you down the path of, opening the drawers underneath the sink to see where the water goes, because you've got to do it better, and you've got to do it at scale such that it works for you, or team, the people who are trying to help, and then you have to keep up with it, right? And that's the kind of watering the garden piece that's super hard. And in some places we've struggled a lot because systems are hard. How do you have people help on a front end that needs API keys to an identity server, right? Like that's a gigantic deal, but it's also important. What else would you kind of lean into? I know you were going to talk about design systems, or at least that's what you had submitted for before, beautiful viruses have taken over
in the
world.
before time.
Right.
It's going to have a nice whole hour to talk about it.
Way back in the old days.
Yeah.
What things stand out for you? What would you like to share with others?
To me, as a front end guy, and I've actually been mainly front end for over a decade. It's been sort of the niche that I've found in my career. And one of the harder things that I've seen people getting into this field that it takes a while to appreciate is the design development sort of that handover.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's not like they just save a PSD or a Figma document or whatever and send it to you. It's sort of another language to learn. It's trying to learn what they're trying to say in between the lines. Like responsive sites, it's not just like the old days where you overlay the PDF or the PSD on top of the page and make it pixel perfect. The early 2000s reference of that. Now there's a tablet design and a mobile and a desktop and all that stuff. And I think a lot, at least in my experience, a lot of designers kind of feel like front end people look at them as the enemy. And I've tried to make it seem, like I said earlier, like it's a partnership type of thing. I'm on your side. If I have to shoot something down that is infeasible for some reason, it's not because I just dislike you. There's a reason to have that conversation. And when the more the design team trusts the front end team, I think it's one of the best things for team morale, because it feels like you're actually working together. When designers feel like they're taking their design, putting their heart and soul into it, and then throwing it over a fence, not seeing it for 5 months, and then the site goes live, that generally isn't the best experience for them, because things change and it doesn't look like how they imagined. the one major perk of a design system is it makes my job easier and their job easier because it's something that we both tangibly have. Like if it takes extra work for what's the next for an H1 to look different in one page than another, well, they know it has to look like this, it's going to look like this, and then when they pull up the site, it's all pulling from that same source base. It sounds kind of like obvious. Well, of course that's great, we want to look the same, but if the design team has the same expectation that we do, that every H1 is going to look exactly identical, it actually takes some of the pitfalls out of the way. Where, maybe we want this one to look a little bit different. Okay, well, if it's going to look different, it's then you have that conversation. And the more pieces you can put into a design system where everyone knows exactly what to expect, the smoother that build out is going to be. And when you get to the design QA phase, where you go back to the designer and have them look at it and tell you all the things you missed, if you're pulling from a design system, that process goes a lot faster than if I'm trying to figure out everything that they comped out, by hand or looking up the attributes. So the big thing that I would point out from a design system that kind of, at least when I talk about it, kind of gets lost, is it's great for designers, it's great for front end people, but it's also great for fostering that team collaboration where we all feel like we're after the same goal. And a lot of times that doesn't seem like it's always there. And I kind of don't know where that comes from, other than just, bad experiences people have had in the past. But it's really a shame, because if I trust the designer and they trust me, it's not like, here's my design and how are you going to ruin it? It's how can, we make this better? Sometimes you have to say no, and there's a time constraint or a technology constraint, but there's been other times where I've heard designers say, I really have this great idea, I don't think we can do it. And if they trust me, they'll tell me about it. And sometimes it's like, actually, there's a library I can pull and that can be done in 2 minutes. And if they don't have that trust and they sort of see you as, a machine that cranks it out, you're not going to get that level of collaboration. So one perk of a design system is it sort of increases collaboration between teams that don't talk as much as they probably should.
Sure. I totally agree. And I think you nailed one of the points is just the talking back and forth, that level of, I don't know, just being able to be honest with one another and say, no, I know you want this thing moved over, 2 pixels, but that 2 pixels is like 4 weeks worth of time. Again, I'm making up a contrived example, but like if we did the button this way, or not from a visual standpoint, we could do it in 2 minutes versus 2 weeks, because the back end system just kind of inherently works this way. Now, how do we kind of make these two work such that it fits within inside a budget? And I often don't think people step back and say, it takes time and money to make these things. We need to do them such that we're not introducing tech debt. We're not, just spending money because, so-and-so said it's got to be here. We need to kind of do right by.
And tech debt always starts so tiny. You're like, oh, this isn't a big deal. I'm just going to do this one thing, and then we won't ever worry about it again. And then 2 weeks later, or a month later, you're down that road, and we've already launched it with the debt, so let's just fix it real fast. Let's throw it in Optimizely or something. We'll just do an override, and before you know it, it's there, and it gets worse with every iteration.
Right. Well, no, it becomes part of the system, right? Because there's no kind of recovering from it. I mean, sure, you can spend a cycle or two and try to clean up a bunch of stuff, but the reality is you built it. It is part of your system. And that's
never fun. It's a tough sell financially if you're working for a client, and who wants to spend a whole sprint cleaning up tech debt?
Right.
That's never a fun time.
So we probably should have started here first, but as we've gotten into the conversation, I realized that there's a lot of people who probably don't even have a good definition around what a design system is, or maybe better said, where the boundaries of one are. Can you put a bit of a description around that for folks?
Ooh, I'm going to probably ramble through this one because it's a hard thing to define.
Well, it is. And I didn't really realize it until we started, but as we're talking, like you guys have one, and of course Material probably falls into their own design system. But if you're a small team and maybe don't have a designer, that doesn't mean you don't kind of qualify to play in this space.
Yeah, because I think everyone on some level, if you have a site or a project that's more than, you know, a single page, you probably could be served by having a design system. Whether or not you need one is another question. But having a design system can be as simple as, these are what our 6 H tags look like, and that's it. Or it could be anything and everything from a hero component to a footer. Like I would say, if you try to put a definition on a design system, it may be different one project or one team to another, and I kind of wouldn't want to limit it, because what works for us might not work for another team. For me, a design system, I guess the best way to put it would be, what is the default state of things before I get going? You know, knowing sort of that baseline definitely makes my role easier. And as I'm interpreting a comp and how to build it, I know what pieces they're pulling from. It takes another perk on the other side is it takes pressure off the design team, like that whole pixel perfect mentality of a decade ago. That's a lot of pressure on me as a front end guy, but it's also pressure on a designer to make sure everything is pixel perfect for how they want it. You know, that means that every single H1 tag has to look exactly the same. If it's coming from a design system and, you know, the H tag is 2 pixels off, but I know it's an H1, I pull from the design system, and that's what I build. So I'm kind of going off on a tangent here as to defining it, which, you know, I'm probably not doing the best job of, but it can be many things to different people. I would probably define a design system a lot differently than a designer. And just because my title has engineer in it doesn't mean that a design system doesn't have value to me. I think people kind of get lost on, well, a design system is for creatives. That's probably not true, especially if you work in the front end space. It may be creatives use it a lot, but I think any front end person would get a lot of value from one too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you said it earlier. It's a language that, you know, we are agreeing to agree on. How do y'all deal with, I'm trying to think of like a kind of situational design aspect of something where, maybe the context of the requirement or kind of the state, of the interaction model on the screen, kind of break the design system. How far do you get into like, or how do you deal with that? Like, this doesn't feel right in the context of the things we've had before.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's 2 ways to look at it, and I kind of lean one way, and I could see it, the more strict way is to not get lost in the weeds of following the design system. Because if you're so focused on, well, this has to be exactly like the design system, you might not end up creating like the right product. It's hard to think of like an obvious example, but if there's a valid reason to deviate from the design system to build something else, be it like a seasonal campaign or something, I can't think of anything on top of my head because usually it doesn't happen often, but I would say don't be so strict to that design system. Like, not to keep giving triathlon analogies, but I have a training schedule. But if I wake up one morning and my leg is sore, it doesn't mean I should just keep doing the same training schedule. You should look at what everything else is going on and sort of modify it based on your needs. If you just follow that training schedule blindly, you're probably going to hurt yourself. If you just blindly follow a design system every day, you might put out work that's not going to be useful or what you're proud of. So I always try to look at it with an open mind. I can see the flip side of, well, we have a design system, we should use it. And I think trying to find that line of, well, how far do we have boundaries? Like, where does that boundary line lie is the key to making it all work together. But if there's a situation where it doesn't feel like it works with the design system, my first question would be, okay, that might be okay. Let's find out why. Let's make sure. Right. And if we're going to deviate from it, you know, that's okay.
Right. Yeah. We have a whole lot of people in chat, and there's some good banter going back and forth in there. For anybody who's listening, if you have a question for Colin or I, definitely drop it in. I am trying to incorporate them as I can, but we've still got some time left. So Did you, for your design system, did y'all take inspiration? I'm assuming you didn't really start from scratch, but did you take inspiration from some other design system or some other thing and kind of make it your own? Or did you just say, file new, and we're gonna go from file new?
It was closer to file new. I think one thing that we were fortunate about was like there's an existing sort of creative design system, not for like our purposes, but for the creatives and everything that they work on. We kind of know what the brand already looks like. The company's 4 years old, so it's not like we're starting a design system with a brand new company. So we knew what our expectations are, what we kind of want to build in the future, and it was more about bringing consistency to existing stuff rather than I'm starting a new company, today's day one, let's build a design system. So our path was a bit easier because we kind of already knew what we wanted to build. It was more about just getting consistency amongst the pieces.
Sure. That makes sense. But it's still, I mean, it's still being able to put it all together is not an easy sense or easy.
Yeah, there were plenty of meetings where we like I said, we would meet once a week when we were regularly putting out changes, where like we would get deep on conversations about things like accordions and the location of a icon or something like that. And it was kind of fun to spend that much time looking at something and have a room full of people that had a passionate feeling one way or the other about something that you could argue was sort of trivial that the end user would never notice. But I like that we had those conversations because it kind of it brought about other topics that other people hadn't thought of.
Totally.
And it maybe I lost this conversation on the icon, but there's an icon somewhere else. And we were like, oh, I remember that when we talked about that 3 weeks ago. We can use it here.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, like that's the right time to have that conversation because it's also the cheapest, right? Right. There's nothing that's been built. You can kind of get it all on a table, and while it may feel like it's impeding progress, what it's doing is it's saving you just an enormous amount of cost on the back end of building it and having to have multiple conversations around it, and whatnot. So I dig it.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely had the luxury of starting when we should have, and at the beginning of a rebuilding the front end and a whole lot more. Yeah. If you're well into a project and you're working towards a deployment in 3 months, it's probably a lot harder to go backwards to get a design system. I think there's value in probably trying to do it with some small pieces, but it's a lot easier to start this at the beginning than it would be midway through a project.
Yeah, Mike asked in chat, when building a documentation around a design system, what considerations did you take regarding the audience? Did you have a particular slant? Was it like just engineering focused?
I think the way that we tried to kind of look at it was if all of a sudden the entire front end team was hit by a bus, whatever metaphor you want to use,
got somebody sick else in a global pandemic,
got corona. If we were suddenly not there, would somebody else be able to pick this up, look at it, and be able to, with some effort, carry on with what we were doing and understand where we were? And that's kind of a broad, general way to paint things. But as long as we've sort of had that mindset, that's how we've tried to write documentation. Like not necessarily for a public audience or anything like that. But if like I said, like if we all got corona and they had to hire a new front end team, could they come in, look at this, and figure everything out within a day or two? So hopefully we're hitting that goal. Hopefully we don't have to test that goal though, because we are all still here.
Yes. Well, Mike says maybe won the lottery is a better choice.
That's probably
than corona.
The best way to go.
So positive.
Yeah.
Have you onboarded or brought anybody new in since you've had it? I'd have to imagine the onboarding process would be drastically easier.
Yeah, and we actually haven't. We've been the same 4-person team throughout all of this. So it's kind of one of the unanswered questions I've had, which is if we bring somebody on new and get them started on this, like how good a job did we do? And honestly, we don't have that information yet because we haven't, the team has stayed the same. Yeah. So it's one of my big, I like to think it'll go smoothly, a lot more smoother than I started, because of the four of us on the front end team, I'm the oldest of the four, who's been there the longest. But for me, onboarding was a process, and it got a little bit easier as we brought each one of us on. So hopefully, whenever number 5 comes onto the team, it will be the easiest yet.
So now I'm going to ask the inverse. So that's starting. How do you keep the design system in check? Like, is there a, you know, there's obviously not a test for this, but, you know, is somebody going back and like revalidating that the assumptions or the things that were put in play now that 4, 5, 6 months has gone by, still good?
Yeah, I mean, right now, we're not really doing that, and it's something that we probably will need to do as things as the site, because we went from, like I said, design system to now we're building components out. Yeah. So get a bunch of components, start to get that new front end built out, and then that might be the right time to go back and make sure that everything's still being followed. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, no, we don't really have a check on it right now, other than, you know, just the four of us wanting to make sure that we don't get stuck with technical debt, which is something that, you know, none of us want. But there's not a process or anything that we have set out for it. And I mean, long term, we probably should have some sort of check and balance, or whatever you want to call it, on that side, because I mean, it certainly could get deviated from in some way, shape, or form. And if nobody notices it, then, you know, it's just like a
then it's not working. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's you know, I've always gravitated towards a lot of automated tests because they were a good documentation of the system behaves a certain way, you know, where our documentation, you know, tends to get stale because, well, we move on to the next thing and we all hate documentation. So
yeah, it's always a fun day.
Jen is asking, do you write tests to check the specs or components of the design system? Yes.
That is something we should do. We have not yet started doing that, though.
So it's just manual checking then, visual checks. Yeah. Do you have a test? Do you have a harness that's checking the whole thing, or are you just testing it in the real implementation?
Right now, it's just real implementation. Because like I said, the design system that we've built isn't being used on the actual site. So it's still in that like early phase. And it's been kind of a balancing act where we're trying to maintain the current existing site, keep that alive, while also doing the new site. And it's a team of only 4 of us. So that's one of the things that we definitely want to do, but just frankly haven't had the capacity with the 4 of us to do right now.
I mean, there's been so much lottery winning in the last 4 months. You know, I feel like 4 people have plenty of time.
Yeah.
Andrew asks, do you track exceptions? I'm not sure where he's going with that one. I guess, have you tracked exceptions of when you have it? Yeah. Deviations of when you've hit the design system.
I kind of, it's, if it's a deviation, generally we would, rather than call it a deviation, we would just make a new
piece
component or whatever it is, and then integrate that in. So it's not really a deviation. It just becomes part of the design system. When we work with creatives and what we want to build into this thing, they're very rigid about trying to make sure they follow the actual design system that we have so far. And if there's a deviation, you know, they would either account for it in some way so that it wouldn't be looked at as like this one-off change. It would become part of the actual system.
And is this, and I meant to ask this earlier, your design system is purely focused on the web, is it not? You're not. Are you bleeding web, over into email. Mobile?
It's future looking to take care of that as well. Right now, it's just on web, but it's built with the intention to be not just web.
Sure. Let's see, reading some more of these. How do you track collisions where a component in a design system may have class names that you use in the old world?
Oh, yeah. So if you bring in the old designs, the new design system onto an old site, the way that we've done that so far is every class for the design system has SDS- in front of it for Smile Design System. And then the SDS dash isn't used in the current site at all. So that way they can sort of live independently.
Your spacer out of it.
Right. Ideally, that's not there because it's 4 extra characters I have to type every time. And maybe once we get to a point, we can get rid of it. But that's how, I mean, that was definitely a major point of trying to coexist with the two, because we're hopefully in the next couple months, we'll have new design system pages coexisting with the old site, and you don't want it to feel jarring and have stuff break. Yeah. So that's definitely been something we've kept a close eye on, because you don't want the new system to break the current system while you're trying to coexist.
Is there, I have to assume that y'all as a group are trying to actively sunset the other. Like,
100%.
Yeah.
We want to do it tomorrow.
Yeah. But I mean, like, are you intentional about like, let's go through and like, let's get rid of it? Or are you like, when you touch a pathway, kind of get rid of it at that time? Does that make sense?
Generally, yeah. Like, generally those are decisions that come from beyond our team. Like it would be, well, if I'm just going in to make a small change or make an addition, like it's if we want to run a sale for 4th of July, and add that to a page, we probably wouldn't go through the whole shebang of bringing in the new design system for that. So it's kind of, well, what do we want to sunset it, or do we just want to leave current state so we can get this task done? And honestly, that's been the biggest struggle for a team
it's got to be hard.
Is trying to balance which is which, and keeping them both alive. Because really, I mean, you could say it's a team of 8, and there's a clone of each of us, and the other Colin's doing the new world, and this Colin's doing the old world.
Right.
And we have a Monday morning resource meeting to figure out who's working on what, because it's whatever metaphor you want to use. You're trying to change the tires on the vehicle while you're still going down the interstate.
Yep. And
that has been a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge until we get it all sunsetted out.
Right. Mike asks, have you considered how native web components impact your design system?
Yes. I mean, we have.
It's certainly anytime you upgrade something or make some like broad sweeping change, system level change, it's hard. You have to be super active about like, no, let's finish it.
Right. The thing that I lose a lot of sleep over is right now, everyone universally wants to get to this new world, which and whenever there's a pain point in the current system or the current process, everyone's like, well, let's get those front end guys. Let's get this working. Let's make sure that we get to that new world as soon as we can. My fear that I kind of lose sleep over a lot is, how does that transition look? And are we making sure that we're going to take care of everything that people like from the old world in the new world? Because when you get to that new place where everything's supposed to be happy, what happens when problems arise and people say, well, we could do this easier in the old world? And how do you take care of that? Because that's less of a technology question and more of like how are we selling it to our colleagues question. And that's why we try to have conversations that sort of go really in depth with, like, the design system's a good example, is whenever we make that transition, we want to make sure that, we don't go from being the saviors to getting us off of the old world to the terrible people that took us off of the old world to this new system that doesn't do what we want either.
Right.
And if I was to say, what's the biggest driving force for things like that design system, it's to not ever get to that place. That when we launch the new version, everybody's excited about it and they kind of know what they're getting.
Yeah.
And that's a focus that I sort of run through my mind probably weekly as we work towards the new world, is let's make sure people are still excited about the new world once they get it. Mm-hmm. They're excited right now. So we've got excitement there.
Right. Honeymoon phase.
Hopefully they're still excited once they get their hands on it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're spot on. I mean, you hope that by putting, process in places that it is improving the time to bite, if you will, right? You don't you don't want it to feel like, well, I could have just changed this here, but now I've got to add a new thing to the design system, and I've got to go through a review, and then I got to push it to NPM, and then I got to pull it back in, and then I got to do this. Before I could have just updated my CSS, and it's like,
yeah,
right. Before you could have done that, but there's also all this.
The only way
crap.
that you get on board with doing all that is you've experienced the pain of doing it the other way, and then you never want to go back there. Because I think if you haven't been through that pain, you're gonna look at it like, well, I don't want to go through all this hassle. I just want to push. I just want to, like GeoCities world. I just want to upload that CSS file, or even before that HTML file, push save, and FTP it, be done. Like there's a reason all that stuff is there, and even on days when I don't really want to go through the hassle, it's certainly worth it, because I don't want to go back to that world either.
Well, the other side of that, it's like, and take the time to automate it and put some documentation around it so that you can effectively say, like, I can mentally move out of that space and on to something else. And then when I need to come back to it, I don't have to remember all the gory crap to push this thing out. I can just, type in a few things, or when I submit it to GitHub, like, it's gone, and I don't have to worry about how it got there.
Right. The Colin of 6 months from now doesn't want to worry about this that we talked about today. And that's a good way. It's sort of policing yourself.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Well, we're coming up on time here. Anything else that you want to drop some beats on for folks? Where could they go to, if this is something that's going to tickle the nerve, how can they go get
well, you
more?
Said you dropped a link in the chat, so that would be what I would say to go check out for what we're working on. And then the other thing would be, don't look at it as this, like, there's so many ideas that I think we all have as software engineers. We want to go build something, and then we're like, oh crap, it's going to take 10 months to get to that place that it's going to be a finished project.
We never say that. We say it's going to take 2 weeks. We'll have it done in a half hour, and then it takes 2 years.
Right. But as a design system, it can be many things. It can be something as simple, like I said, it's just, these are what our H tags look like. Just start with a very, very MVP version and get the ball rolling. A lot of if you're talking about design systems, a lot of the gains don't come from actually like building the design system, but is having the conversations with other team members outside of your team, so that you're all on the same page. And that to me is as valuable as like the code that I'm going to pull in. So even if you're just, get the ball rolling on it, and it's just you building a design system that says, this is our design system, here's our H tags, here's our fonts, that's better than nothing. And it could potentially get a conversation started from there. So I'd say, don't look at like Airbnb's design system and go, oh my gosh, there's no way I could build that. It doesn't have to be that. It could be something much smaller, and then, see where it goes from there.
Yeah. No, I love that. Start simple, do something, be intentional about it, be upfront about it, really, and then build on it. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, that's what we're going to call it. Where, Colin, can people find you?
Twitter is @ColinLord. My very small, simple portfolio site is colinlord.com. There's not a lot of other Colin Lords out there. So if you Google me, you'll find I'm on all the social networks, but I'd say Twitter. When I speak at conferences, I say, hit me up on Twitter. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me. And that's @ColinLord.
I feel like there should be a castle in England somewhere that's like Colin Lord Estate.
I mean, I would not object to having something like that.
It could be there. It could be there. Who knows?
Yeah, you never know.
That's right. Well, thanks for the time today, and everybody who joined us. Thanks for the questions and the banter back and forth. If you dig on this kind of thing, give us a follow. Go follow Colin on the Twitters and anywhere else. And you're in our Slack, so you can join us in Slack, and
I'm there
and talk to him there too. So with that, Colin, thanks for the time, and
everyone have a good week.
Enjoy. Well, we got to get you some more of those little bottles in the back. Bottles and bobbles.
The shelf is kind of full, but I'm sure I can find room somewhere.
You know what? I'm sure there's some extra space on the ends.
And get another shelf.
There you go. That's right. I was forced when we redid The Office to get rid of stuff. So now I have very tiny shelves that I'm only allowed to put that much stuff on said shelf. So
yeah,
that works too. All right. Colin, thank you for the time today. Everybody, thank you for joining.